Hey everybody, welcome to week 2 of Hamlet, concerning Hamlet. Here's what I did. What I wanted to do was go through everything that I assigned for you, Act 1 and Act 2. I wanted to go through almost meticulously. I wanted to point out all of the little places where there's something cool happened, or where Hamlet's made some wordplay, or where there was a theme that I thought was important, or where a question was raised that we're going to return to over and over again in this course. And I was recording and I got to the end of Act 1 and I looked down at the clock and I had talked for an hour and a half. So that's not tenable. Nobody wants to sit for an hour and a half. In fact, somebody once told me that if I'm going to make a video like this for a student, I should really keep it to 15 minutes, which I'm going to try something else. I'm going to try to hit the 15-minute mark. There's no way that's going to happen. In probably a half hour, I'm still going to be here talking because there's just so much I want to talk about. I love this stuff. But I'm gonna try. I'm gonna streamline. In fact, when I thought about it again, I mean, it's really when it came down to it, there's really like one speech here that I really wanted to talk about in this video format. I think I can do the rest in live margin or in our chats on Tuesday, Thursday, which by the way, I'm gonna record and put up. So for anybody who couldn't make it or who just wants to watch for a little bit of extra erudition. But let's talk about Hamlet. Now let's get into the play itself. This play is going to dominate our entire class. It's what the class is about, and I really like that we're going to spend a good long time, get a good long soak with a single play. We're going to be able to juice this play for maybe about as much time as it actually deserves. A good 15 weeks won't even get to the bedrock of all of the stuff going on in this one play. I think it does definitely live up to all of its reputation. It's just an amazing piece of work. But one thing that this allows us to do is that in these like week or two that we're going to spend on our first read of the play, first of several I hope, is we won't need to come up with any conclusions. We won't need to come up with any answers. We can just ask questions and we can let them linger and we can see what else we can bring in to inform the questions as we go through the course. Before we get into the play itself and start opening up these questions, I wanted to talk about what exactly it is that we're reading when we pick up a book, a modern book called Hamlet, and what relation this has to something like Shakespeare's intention, and what relation it has to his theater, his stage, and what relationship it has to its original publications 400 years ago. So let's take a look at just what this original publication looked like. Here's the thing. When you just pick up a book at random, a Hamlet at random, you're probably reading some edition, a version of this second quarto 1604 edition of the play. Now, this wasn't the only edition. It's the second quarto. There was a first quarto a year earlier. A quarto refers to the size of the paper. 17 years after this, there's a first folio edition of the plays, which contains a version of Hamlet. And these three versions of Hamlet are in fact very different, especially this second quarto and the first. So it's worth keeping in mind that there are different versions of Hamlet as you read this, and that there might be some things that are very different, and that we don't know which one is like Shakespeare's intention. Now you might say, well, who cares about Shakespeare's intention? The dude's 400 years dead. He's not here. I can do whatever I want. And that is true. But it's also worth wondering, it's also just worth keeping in mind the fact that this text isn't just like some monolith. There's other ways of reading it. There's other versions of it. It just so happens that scholars have sort of come to a consensus about which one should be the basis of the version that you read. And you don't necessarily have to subscribe to their consensus. They pick this for all kinds of reasons, one of which is that it happens to be sort of the longer one, and in many ways what they say to be the most polished one. All of these questions, all of these assessments you can like leave in doubt or wonder about. But here's another thing editors do, is that they change things. They change things to match your modern expectations of what a play should be. And as such, every modern edition is a representation of a version that was of a text from the past, not that text. Yeah, you are not reading the Hamlet of anything like Shakespeare's Hamlet. You're reading a very carefully tailored and accommodated version. For instance, what is the name of this play? You have Hamlet, right? Of course. Well, look at this second quarto edition of 1604. The title is The Tragical History of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. That's a mouthful. It's a mouthful we don't like to have on our books, covers of our books. So it's been changed, and we read a play called Hamlet now. Other things have been changed too, like the appearance of the text on the page. Just this title page gives us a little hint of that. For instance, this S thing. It's S, the long S, S lunga. It's the same kind of S. It looks like an F, most people say, but it's an S. It's the same sort of long S that's in like the integral sign in calculus, for instance. Notice the spelling differences. Tragical with two L's and history and with IE. Copy with an IE instead of and two P's instead of a Y. These are all things you might be like, come on, why are they misspelling so much? Well, the thing is that they knew their own English better than we do, right? This is what readers were comfortable with on the page. We are comfortable with very different things. So our editors, they're very important. They're like the silent, most important person in reading works from the past, the editor. They've made lots of choices for you, and they're not always the best choices, and sometimes things are lost in the difference between the original and the version that you're actually reading. So I just wanted to look at the first page. I always like looking at first lines of plays. I don't know about you, but I wanted to compare it to how the page appears in this second quarto 1604 edition. So let's just take a look at those first lines, which are very great first lines. Who's there? I mean, this play is very much about calling into question the identity of the characters and the reality of the ghost, and who is Hamlet. It's a gold, simple first line. Notice how it's presented in this 1604 version. One, W, just to point out, is sort of separated into its two component parts. Two U's, W or W, right? V and U, by the way, or what we call V and U, were very much interchangeable in Renaissance type. Notice unfold has what we would call a V in the front, but it's doing the work of the U. It's just how printing customs or protocols were at the time. Look at who's there. Who's there? Now compare our who's there. See? Things have been added. Punctuation has been added. This little apostrophe. And spelling's been changed. You might look at that and you might say, wait a minute, that's the possessive who's, isn't it? But once again, they knew what they were doing. It's their English. But our editors have made it look more like our English for us. So this version is already making some pretty radical departures from something like the original version. Another question you might have is, what's the relationship of this to what was said on the stage at some point? And there's a tricky question. So we think that the play was first produced in something like 1600 or 1601 for various reasons. But this book didn't come out for another 4 years. Was it changed? Can we ever know? It's good questions. Speaking of the theatrical context, the performance context, another reason why I really love Who's There as an opening line, well, it gets to one of the many ways in which you can think about reading a play. How do you read a play? Do you stage it in your head? Do you see like a theater? Do you see like a stage? And do you have characters which you kind of half think of as actors playing roles appear on the stage? Do you sort of direct them yourself? You know, do you produce the play in your mind? Do you dress them? You know, do you have them sort of speak out their lines? Or do you kind of read it as you might read a novel, silently? Do you imagine that you're in Denmark, for instance, like in the world of the fiction, and don't really worry about the play context, the performative context so much? Any way is fine. Once again, anybody who would care about how you're doing this has been dead for 400 years, right? They have no purchase on your experience of this play anymore. So there's lots of different ways. I tend to think, look at it from as many angles as you possibly can. So looking at this first line, though, the performative context can remind us of certain things that will, I don't know, expand the meaning of this first line. For instance, let's say you're going to the play in 1601 in London. You've never seen it before. People have been buzzing about it maybe, but you've never seen it, so you don't know who's who. It's called Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. You don't know who that is. What you don't see for sure are these names, right? They don't say Bernardo and then say their lines, right? These are for the reader's eyes only. But on the stage, you only hear the speech, right? So it's kind of a great first line for any play because the first thing the audience wants to know when some dude walks out on the stage is, oh, who's there? Right? Who's that? They don't know. The play has to tell you. They name each other in a few lines for Bernardo and Francisco here. But that state of not knowing what's going on is very much, I guess, a common audience attitude towards any play experience in the theater ever. But what I think is interesting is that this first line kind of internalizes that moment of hesitation and doubt and not understanding what's going on and makes it part of the play. Yeah, it's sort of embodied in characters like the ghost, in characters like Ophelia, who is constantly saying things, I don't know what I should do, and she's talking about doubt all the time. And of course in Hamlet, who is hesitating for almost this entire play, who isn't sure of himself, where he stands, what his relationship is to everybody else. But as the title of my course is sort of meant to suggest, really every character in this play is concerned with Hamlet in just about everything they say and everything they do. So, like I said, I wanted to focus in on one line. I am assuming you've all read these acts carefully. So I'm really going to zoom in on just one speech. There's lots going on here, by the way. I mean, there's so much, which is why I blew an hour and a half talking about it before. In particular, there's the first few soliloquies by Hamlet. And soliloquies are so interesting for many reasons. But one of them I find interesting and to think about in this play is noting that in Shakespeare's plays, soliloquies are often spoken when a character is alone. I often wonder, are they actually saying, like in the world of the fictional, like of the world of Denmark in this play, you know, that you're supposed to sort of get into when you've suspended your disbelief, in Samuel Coleridge's terms, when you've suspended your disbelief and you're in the world, is Hamlet actually saying stuff out loud when he's alone, and is he talking to himself, or is this sort of the theatric context sort of opening a window into his thoughts, and we're seeing and speech is just sort of representation of an internal monologue, yeah, a sort of Augustinian soliloquy. Is this in other words when Hamlet says, I don't have it up in front of me, but when in Act 1, Scene 2, he starts in his first soliloquy, he's alone, and he says, oh, that this too sallied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. He's basically saying, I wish I could just die. I wish I could just melt and go away because my dad's dead and my uncle hooked up with my mom. It's disgusting. Everything's unnatural. Everything's screwed up. I just want to die. Is he saying that out loud? Or are we just sort of hearing what's in his head? Now, the end of that's the soliloquy, which again, sorry, it's not in front of us. He says, oh, I must hold my tongue because Horatio is about to show up and tell him about the ghost. Makes you think that he was actually saying it out loud, which is a weird thing to do. People talk to themselves a lot. So that's something. Now, he's alone in his sort of second great soliloquy in Act 1. That's what I wanted to point out. It's hard to say it's a soliloquy. So the ghost, whom characters have had trouble identifying, brings more value to the first question of the play. Who's there? Who is this ghost? Is it a ghost? Is it a demon that is sort of messing with us? Like, is it trying to, is it an omen in the omens that came up? This is Horatio, when he was thinking about it, he says, it's giving me like a mote in my mind's eye. And it's making me think this must be like an omen and something terrible is about to happen. This apparition, this thing, as he calls it, of the ghost. Nobody's willing to quite name it and say, well, it's Hamlet Sr. It is Hamlet. Hamlet Sr. in this case. Hamlet Jr., when he has this interview with the ghost in Act 1, Scene 5, he doesn't really question who it is. It's clearly his dad. And his dad has got a pretty screwed up story to tell. That he was murdered by Hamlet's uncle Claudius, and that his mom is not necessarily pure in her interests. Even on this page, he says that. Let's see here. Let me make sure I'm in the right place. Is this the place with the incest? Oh, yep, there it is. a couch for luxury and incest. So there's a way in which even Hamlet's mother is caught up in this. Although one thing that's important to note is that the ghost of Hamlet's father says, leave your mom to heaven. Don't hurt your mom, but revenge me. Not just revenge, remember me. Adieu, 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 remember me. That's the last thing Hamlet hears from the ghost, at least in this first encounter. So what he says next I find to be interesting. At the risk of making you cringe, I'm going to read it out loud just for a little bit, just so we have it on the table, and we're going to look at it too. Maybe see if I can, there we go. There we go. Let's make this a little bigger. And I'll move my visage over here. Hamlet's alone again. So when Hamlet's alone in this play, he says some of the best lines that Shakespeare ever wrote. So he's alone here. I'm not sure how great these lines are, but especially given what we've talked about so far, there's some interesting stuff going on here which I want to kind of keep in mind. He says, "Oh, all you host of heaven, O earth, what else? And shall I couple hell? O fie, hold my heart, and you, my sinews, grow not instant old. But bear me stiffly up. Remember thee? Aye, thou poor ghost, whiles memory holds a seat in this distracted globe. Remember thee? Yea, for from the table of my memory I'll wipe away all trivial, fond records, all saws of books, all forms, all pressures past that youth and observation copied there. And thy commandment all alone shall live within the book and volume of my brain, unmixed with baser matter. Yes, by heaven, O most pernicious woman, O villain, smiling, damned villain, my table meet, it is, I set it down, that one may smile and be a villain. At least, I'm sure it may be in Denmark, or be so in Denmark, sorry. So, uncle, there you are. Now, to my word, it is adieu, adieu, remember me. I have sworn. What is he on about? He's already acting a little nuts, but he just saw a ghost of his dad, so yeah, I'll give him a little bit of disgruntlement. He seems to fasten on just the last lines that his dad said, his ghost dad, right? Remember, remember. So what does he do? Well, he sets upon very elaborately promising to remember, but I think it's interesting how he does so. He says basically, I'm going to wipe my hard drive, my internal hard drive. He uses this common like medieval and Renaissance metaphor that the mind is a book, that the brain is a book. And it contains content that's been sort of impressed on the memory. Hamlet says, I'm going to wipe it all clean so I can make room for nothing but you, Hamlet, Sr., my dad, and this information, this new and most important information you've told me, that finally lets me see, I guess, in what relationship I stand to everything else. Nothing else matters anymore. This is sort of, in a way, he's claiming here that he's sort of grown up. There's all this language in the play about the sort of liquid dew of youth. In his first soliloquy, he's like, I wish I could melt and become like dew. And then Ophelia's brother, so Hamlet sort of has this love affair with Ophelia. And her brother says basically like, you know, don't listen to Hamlet. He's in the dew of youth, the liquid dew. And anyway, so Hamlet's in this as a sort of a sort of tumultuous, turbulent young man. At this moment, it's like he's saying, no, I am going to dump all of that. So if you've read Macbeth, and we're going to, Lady Macbeth has a similar moment right after she learns some vital information. She basically says, take away everything that's in me right now, all my nature and my sex, get rid of it. I need to do this job. It's going to take, I'm going to have to clear out the past. Hamlet says it in a very different way. I'm going to clear out myself. And what we get is basically a scene of like possession. Yeah, I'm going to let you, ghost, father, take complete possession of me. So this new content, this most important thing that I figured out, so what we read before last week, we read this scene that I find very similar here. I don't say that Hamlet read it and it informed him necessarily, but I just think it's interesting to think of them in context, mutual context. Hamlet or Augustine in his soliloquies was saying, like, I'm desperate. I'm rolling around in my brain. How am I going to learn about myself, my good and evil? Well, Hamlet's just been given those things on a plate. Yeah, he's been given the. I don't know if he's been given much good, but he's definitely been given a story of evil, namely his uncles. He's been given a version of himself, which is what where he stands in relation to his family and what he has to do. And you might say that that's his good. There is work for him to do. And so immediately he sets putting this in his memory. But this is the part that I find very strange in this speech. um, it's almost comical. It almost breaks out of the tragedy and enters into comedy, which I think is a facet of this play all over the place. But here, especially in the way that Hamlet's always taking jabs at people and taking their words and flipping them and like punning them and screwing with people. It's always like 1 inch away. He's always 1 inch away from the fool. Like if you've ever seen any of other Shakespeare's other plays, his comedies, there's a fool in it who will play with words. Hamlet's always just 1 inch away from being this play's fool. Well, here there's a scene that's very foolish, but it's very familiar to us based on what we read last week. All this new information is worth remembering. But apparently memory isn't good enough, because Hamlet says, my tables. That's basically saying, get me a notebook. Where's that tables? There it is. Meat it is, I set it down. What? What's this all about? Why? And then, so one could act this in many different ways. You can direct your own internal version of this play, right? But here, the editor has put this little stage direction. That's not in my version, by the way. I don't think it's in the quarto either. Writing this down. But one way of playing this is that Hamlet literally gets out a writing notebook and literally writes down what his father just said, or maybe just, adieu, adieu, remember me. Yeah, that much he swears. It's weird, like, I swear I'll remember you. He doesn't say, I'll swear I'm going to take vengeance. In fact, what transpires in the end of this and next is it calls into doubt that he's really taken as sort of true and legitimate what the ghost has said. I'll talk about it in just 1 second, I guess, but like what I wanted to point out before I lose it is, technically speaking, the ghost said 3 adieus. Adieu, 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 remember me. So in the lapse between the end of the ghost's speech and Hamlet like going hyperbolically into hysterics about wiping clean his mind so he can be possessed by his father's presence and purpose, he already got it wrong. He writes just 2 adieus. He didn't get it right. So I don't know what that means yet, but I'm going to say let's put a finger in, or let's put a button in it, like so much else. But suffice it to say, remember his father or not, his father was pretty clear that he wanted Hamlet to take revenge. It's very Scandinavian, and this is originally a Scandinavian story. Shakespeare got it from like a Viking history called the Histories of the Danes by a dude named Saxo Grammaticus, or the Stone Grammarian. But so this is this vengeance and feud business. So anyway, Hamlet's buddies come back on stage in a minute, and he swears them all to secrecy, and he says this weird thing, which is, I perchance hereafter shall think meet to put on an antic disposition. He's going to act insane, in other words. So here comes the famous shtick of Hamlet, is that Hamlet is going to try to sort of gaslight people, or sort of gaslight himself, or whatever the case. He's going to do this bizarre thing, which is act nuts, in order to draw out his uncle. So apparently he doesn't really believe the ghost after all. He yet has doubt. Doubt is everywhere in this play, especially in Ophelia, whose first lines are about doubt, and who goes on to really not understand where she stands with relation to anyone else. So in Act 2, it seems Hamlet has already begun to do this procedure. He's gaslighting Ophelia by wafting in and out, acting all creepy and silent. In fact, acting very much like the ghost. Yeah, he kind of like flitters into a room, silently flitters back away, much as the ghost was screwing with people on the battlements. And the king and the queen are sort of noticing this and wondering what's going on. And everybody has sort of taken this red herring, the red herring of Ophelia, and think that Hamlet's lovesick. That's what's responsible for what they call his transformation. So the question everybody always asks, and which is perennial, Is he really supposed to be insane? Or is he acting insane? And what's the difference? So, a very powerful line at the end of Act 1, he says, is that time is out of joint. It's as if the whole world is off kilter and screwy. The whole world is nuts. He's going around, by the way, in Act 1, Scene 2, Hamlet's coming out in black, right? And the king and the queen are like, what's wrong with you, kid? It's common. People die all the time. Your dad died. So what? I married your mom like a second later. Whoop-de-doo. What's the big deal? Why are you so particular about all this? And I think it's pretty understandable why he's kind of particular about this situation. The world is nuts. So what is madness if the whole world is mad? Is he acting crazy? Is he crazy? Is there any difference between the two? And what is crazy if the entire context is also out of joint, is also crazy? So there's a lot of places in here, by the way. Last thing I want to mention before I let you go, because I'm sure I've already knocked out the 15-minute mark I was shooting for. Yeah, by 10 minutes. Is this idea of the fourth wall. So maybe if you've encountered this before, it's the idea that, like, you know, there are three walls in a theater, but then there's an open fourth wall, right? And the actors on a stage, in general, in traditional, like, Western theater, they perform as if the audience isn't there. And the audience is meant to let them perform without sort of interfering, right? So some famous plays have something like an interaction between the actors and the audience. An actor might turn to the audience and recognize that they're there. So at the end of plays, like at the end of The Tempest, if you've ever read that, what's his name, Prospero, sort of turns to the audience and talks to the audience and sort of is speaking as if he's shed the role of Prospero and he's just the actor now talking. So the fourth wall has come down, or there's been a breach of the fourth wall. There's several places where this happens already in this play. One is where the ghost is sort of under the stage, it seems, right? Like in the theatric context, and he's saying swear in this creepy way, like, because Hamlet's saying, everybody, I need you to swear to be silent about this. I need you to tell no one about what you've seen here tonight. And this ghost is down underneath saying, swear. And Hamlet says this really funny thing on line 150 of Act 1, Scene 5. He says, after the ghost says, swear, he says, ha ha, boy, say'st thou so? Are thou there, Truepenny? Come on, ye here. You hear this fellow in the cellarage? It's weird because it's funny, sort of. Truepenny, in those lines, Hamlet's sort of making an allusion to this character in another Elizabethan play that was popular at the time. I can't remember, I didn't write it down. This dude named Tom Truepenny. So he seems to be making a reference to another Elizabethan play. Well, there the fourth wall starts to crack a little bit. And then he says, come on, you hear this fellow in the cellarage? What? Now they're up on the top of a castle. And so he's talking about there being a voice like right under the floorboards, as if they know they're at the theater. Hamlet seems as if almost to wink at this moment, and to seem to know, in other words, that he's playing a role. He almost seems to know, in other words, that he is in the tragical history of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. And I think that sort of quasi-self-consciousness of himself as playing a role, maybe even playing the wrong role in a play that is sort of out of his control, is one of the sort of foundational characters of this play that's resulted in its longevity. It's I don't want to say meta, but I mean it's because I hate that word. But it's sort of meta. Now, Act 2, one of the main things that happens there is that an acting troupe has come, and Hamlet leaps on this opportunity because for some reason in his whatever is going through his mind, it makes sense to him to co-opt this acting group to in a sort of ploy to implicate the king, or to sort of, he says, the play is the thing to draw out the conscience. The play is the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. The play's the thing. There's going to be a play within a play, so that's pretty common in lots of Elizabethan theater. But this play, maybe we'll see if it's something different. He's going to present what happened, what the ghost said happened to the current king, King Claudius, and he's hoping elicit some sort of indicative response, you know, incriminating response. What a weird way to go about it, right? He's just been told by a supernatural appearance of his father what happened, but he's still in doubt, and he doesn't know what to do, and he needs more confirmation. So it's a lot of strange things, and that extra confirmation is grounded in the form of this piece as a whole. In other words, the mode in the play to the instrument within the play to sort of promote or bring forward the narrative is a play, and it doubles itself. How about that? The sort of operative mode in this play is doubling. There's lots of doubling. There's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Hamlet's two stupid friends from his youth that are brought in to sort of spy on him. There's Hamlet, son of Hamlet, which results in a vengeance scheme, and then there's Laertes, son of Polonius, and Polonius dies, and there's a vengeance scheme there. There's the two brothers, Hamlet. There's the two Hamlets, Hamlet Senior, Hamlet Junior. Everything is sort of offered a mirror, and even before the acting troupe comes in to play this Murder of Gonzago play, which is supposed to sort of ferret out the real conscience of King Claudius, there's this elongated set speech which you read. One of the players does this speech sort of supposedly from the Aeneid, although it goes into some different detail. And in that speech, Pyrrhus, who is the son of Achilles, kills Priam, father of Hector. So how that projects onto the play is the last thing I'm going to mention. I think it's interesting because it's kind of unclear who would kind of connect to who in this relationship. Because on the one hand, you have a violent intruder unhappily carrying, sort of unfortunately and horribly killing someone's father. Pyrrhus killing Priam. On the other hand, you have somebody's son, in this case Achilles, taking vengeance for the death of their father, and taking vengeance on somebody else's, like an older man, for this. So on the one hand, you have a sympathetic, you know, this set speech is sympathetically representing Hamlet's case. On the other hand, and from a completely different moral perspective, it's sort of representing, it's sort of analogizing the negative thing that Hamlet is about to do. I kind of screwed that up. But whatever the case is, there's lots of things here. There's lots of doublings, which usually sort of act to shed two different lights on the same case. But it all sort of centers on Hamlet. The whole play is concerned with who he is and what he's like and what the state of his mind is at any given time. So I've talked for more than I wanted to, but at least it wasn't an hour and a half. If you have questions, please, and if you can make it, please come to one of the two optional Zoom chats. I'll talk to you there. I will record those and I'll put them up too. And I will see you again next week.